Hello, and welcome to another Worship in the Gap. Hi, I'm Jim McKenzie, interim minister at First Congregational Church in Port Washington, Wisconsin. So I want to start with something just close to the heart of those of us in the worshiping community at First Congregational Church. I want to ask for your prayers for 3 little ones who have been or soon will be baptized. I'm not sure what's in the water these days, but this past Wednesday, Cecilia Ann Yago was baptized, and today, Sunday, during this time that you're possibly watching Worship in the Gap, we're baptizing Colin Matthew Reamer. In 2 weeks, we'll be baptizing Ryan Daniel Bruner. So it's a wonderful time. And what this means to us in the community is that we welcome and celebrate the goodness of these precious little children, and that we celebrate God's love for them as we recognize that we are all children of God. It's a good point of reminder, and it's a good, wonderful moment of good news of God's grace. We also want to keep in our prayers those who are sick and injured. People like Jim Melikar and Sherry, who provides care, constant care for Jim. He's home, he's on the farm. Of course, you know Jim, he's worried about the farm, even though the sons are very diligent and taking good care of it for him. We also want to pray for Diana Schrader. Those of you who are frequent members in worship, you know that Diana has difficulty walking, but the other day, my goodness, she fell down about 10 stairs of concrete going from her apartment down to the street in Port Washington, and she's in a wheelchair right now and having a very difficult time getting around. We also want to remember some of those in our community who have lost loved ones. I assume that most of you know, but perhaps not all of you, that Louise Reed lost the love of her life, Weldon, a few weeks ago, and she'll be moving north to be near her daughter. I hope that you all will send me constant updates on those that we need to pray for in the church, those who need our prayers and support, and it will help us to know how best to respond to those people. You see, we don't just pray in this church and leave it with God. We pray and ask God to remember those who have needs, but also to remind us how we might be God's hands and feet in serving the needs that these people have. Some of you have been asking me lately how long the doors of the church will be shut, and when will that time come when we can again gather in corporate worship? I don't know. And it seems like it's longer rather than shorter. But what we did do this week, and I want you to know this, is that we formed a committee to take a look at the who, what, where, when, and how, and why of all of this. And we want we chose some very intelligent people who are very involved in our church to take a look at this. And this committee will help us figure this out. Of course, we lean on the direction of the conference office, and the school board at Port Washington just came up this week with their plan for reopening. So we're going to use those to help us figure out what we need to do for our church. But we'll keep you posted, because these are important pieces of information that you need to know. In the meantime, I do hope that you know that you can join us online in a Zoom meeting for Bible study on Wednesdays, that you can join us at the church outside in the grass to the right if you're at the parking lot. And on the second and fourth Sundays, we have summer fellowship where you can bring a lawn chair and a cup of coffee, and we sit in a large circle, socially distant, and people are just renewing friendships left and right. And then towards the end, we always have an important question that we go around, and everybody takes about a minute, and it's a good way to get to know each other and to share our ideas about what's going on in the world. Again, I'll say it that this Sunday and 2 weeks from this Sunday, we will have a baptism at the summer fellowship as well. Don't forget about drive-through communion. That's on the first Sunday of the month. And what we do is we hand out these little plastic cups that have little containers that have juice and a little wafer in them. You drive through, we give you a blessing and send you on your way. We hope that you go home and maybe watch Worship in the Gap and follow along with us as we do provide a communion service as part of that video that Sunday as well. So there's opportunities. It's not the same thing, but we're finding out that we actually are a lot more flexible than we used to think. So here's what I'm thinking about today. I think that far too often American Christianity corrupts the gospel message of Jesus. And what I mean by that is there's something of this narcissistic search for things like personal gain, emotional affirmation and assurance, or confirmation of one's pet cause or belief. Now, I know that's a real mouthful, so let me try to break that down for you. The call to discipleship, the commitment to follow Jesus in sharing the love of God and participating in the presence of God's kingdom here on earth is often substituted for many lesser goals. Some might say lesser gods. There are those who think that the purpose of faith is to provide for the personal benefits of certain positions or possessions, psychological attributes like peace and joy, and believing that God is on their side, on their team, their country, or their cause. And that becomes their focus. They spend their time and energy chasing after the rewards of faith and church life rather than growing in Christ. And they pursue the benefits of believing that they are the elite, the righteous, the entitled, the saved. And they comfort themselves with a sense of security in their salvation, certain that they are safe within the confines of God's covenant. To be clear, and I've been reading about this for the last number of months, the Old Testament is full of examples where God is seen as the protector of the people of Israel and fights alongside them in wars against their enemies. I'm in the Psalms right now, and the Psalms are loaded with laments and praises of God's hand of protection. Even the very land of Canaan, you see, which belonged to others, was given to the Israelites after they had left Egypt, wandered in the desert for 40 years, and came to believe that God had given this land to them. And those that were already living there, well, they would have to leave, don't you see, because God was their protector. God was on their side. You see how this can be corrupted when we believe that we are the ones closest to the throne, when we think that we're the ones that are the elite, the righteous, the saved, that whatever actions we take, God condones, blesses, and supports. But I'm afraid that when we begin to take a position like this, that we actually co-opt the message of Christ and dilute the meaning of what it means to be a follower of Jesus. The great paradox, of course, is that when we pursue the things of this world, we aren't very likely to actually achieve the happiness we desire. Things of this world don't necessarily bring us the happiness that we desire. We achieve that measure of fulfillment. Listen to this very carefully. We achieve that measure of fulfillment in life by living a life of meaning, by working at being kind and helpful and trustworthy, of thinking of others, of working towards matters of rightness and justice, of forgiveness and grace. You see, our happiness is always a byproduct and never the primary goal. That's why I am so taken by a reading in the lectionary this week, which is a story about Solomon. Solomon, you may remember, was King David's son, and he was to be the next in line to be the king. one night, Solomon had a dream. And this passage I want to read you is from 1 Kings chapter 3, verses 5 through 12. At Gibeon, the Lord appeared to Solomon in a dream by night. And God said, "What should I give you? Ask what I should give you." And Solomon said, "You have shown great and steadfast love to your servant my father David, because he walked before you in faithfulness, in righteousness, and in uprightness of heart toward you. And you have kept for him this great and steadfast love, and have given him a son to sit on his throne today. And now, O Lord my God, you have made your servant king in place of my father David. And although I am only a little child, I do not know how to go out or come in. And your servant is in the midst of the people whom you have chosen, a great people, so numerous they cannot be numbered or counted. Give your servant, therefore, an understanding mind to govern your people, able to discern between good and evil, for who can govern your people?" It so pleased the Lord that Solomon had asked this, that God said to him, "Because you have asked this and have not asked for yourself long life or riches or the life of your enemies, but have asked for yourself understanding to discern what is right, I now do according to your word. Indeed, I give you a wise and discerning mind. No one like you has been before you, and no one will rise after you." You see, in his selflessness, Solomon asked not for something for himself, but he asked for the ability to have the wisdom to govern and serve the people of Israel. God was quite taken by that. And later in the story, God, although it's always secondary to the story, God gave Solomon great riches. But I want to tell you the other side of that story. You see, Solomon was not perfect, and by no means was Solomon a saint. He would later tax the people of Israel unmercifully. He had 700 wives and 300 concubines. And as a former marital therapist, I think that had to have been pretty difficult to manage. But he married these foreign wives for political power in making agreements with other kingdoms. And then, perhaps most egregiously, he assumed their gods, the gods of these wives, and he began serving them, violating the first 2 commandments, that you should have no other god before me, and you should not make yourself graven images. God was not pleased with this. But Solomon, like all of us, lived this side of heaven. It's true that he had his good days and his bad days, and his days of righteousness, his days of faithlessness. But on this day, or should I say this night, in which he had this dream, he had his priorities in proper order. His sense of what was good for himself and others was on target, don't you see? God told him to ask for whatever he wanted most. But the only thing that Solomon asked for was that he would be wise enough to govern, wise enough to serve others, wise enough to be seen as faithful in God's eyes. Later on, as I said, God would provide many riches and other possessions. But what's interesting to me about that little addition to the story is that it only came in this order. His faith was his primary goal, and everything else was a byproduct. Isn't that how it goes in life? That when we have our priorities right, life seems to be a bit more manageable. Life seems to be happier, more fulfilling, and our relationships with others much more productive. Let's make sure that we have our priorities in place, and the other things will follow as a byproduct. So here's the big thing today. I'd like to ask you a question, or maybe to put it another way, I'd like to challenge you. I'd like you to think about what you would ask God for. If God came to you in a dream tonight and said, "Hey Bob, hey Mary, hey Jim," what would you ask for? Would it be for something for yourself or to help someone else? How you answer might well be an important clue for you as to where you are on the road to being a disciple of Jesus. It might just tell you something very important about whether your faith is one of those narcissistic longings for benefits, or whether it is to participate in the holy adventure of sharing God's love with the world and participating in bringing God's kingdom to earth, a kingdom of peace and justice, of forgiveness and grace. Which would you rather be a part of? Which would you rather build your faith upon? I wish you well. I wish you well in that. And if you're like most of us, you're going to find yourself somewhere between here and not yet. Somewhere between heaven and earth. So that's why I wish you well, as we all struggle like Solomon on our good days and our bad days. But I'll be praying for you, and trust that you'll be praying for me. Hey, this is Jim McKenzie, that interim minister up at First Congregational Church in Port Washington, Wisconsin. saying stay well, stay safe, and stay faithful. And I'll see you next time right here in Worship in the Gap.